Vielen Dank.
Thank you so much. Thank you for shortening your coffee break accordingly. And I now have the pleasure to open the last session of this bilingual morning, of this bilingual part. As announced, it concerns the Yokohama Declaration and its further development. And after I already forced you more or less to agree to shorten the coffee break, I am now going to sacrifice the introduction and offer this as a compensation for this. So, and why can I do so? Because the Yokohama Declaration, as the name and place already suggest, for the First World Conference in 2010 took place in Japan, in Yokohama. It was adopted there. And we agreed that those who organized the 4 world conferences so far, Professor Ye, who sits to my left or to my right when you look at him, from South Korea, who is going to organize the next World Conference, that this says something about the significance of the declaration for the reform discussion in your countries. I'm going to skip myself, also for reasons of time. We already had an intensive debate, so at this point there's nothing to add, and therefore I would ask Mr. Arai for his statement.
Jetzt erlaube ich mir, auf Englisch zu sprechen.
Now I'm going to speak English.
Yokohama Declaration was adopted by all the participants at the First World Congress on Adult Guardianship Law, which was held in Yokohama in October 2010, and is a declaration that sent out a message to the world. The First World Congress was participated in by around 500 academics, judges, and practitioners from both Japan and overseas. The Yokohama Declaration was a result arrived at by the participants after much heated debate. In response to the Yokohama Declaration, Japan established the Act to promote the use of the adult guardianship systems, which came into force on April this year. Based on the spirit of the Yokohama Declaration, the Act makes the establishment in each community of adult guardianship support centers a responsibility of local governments and seeks to popularize the adult guardianship system. I am delighted that the Yokohama Declaration has been put into a concrete form through this legislation. The Act to promote the use of the adult guardianship systems should be established the special committee in the cabinet, the head of which is the Prime Minister. To arrive at the goals stipulated in the Act, we have to draw up guidelines on the treatment of the legal support and protection of adults. The Japan Adult Guardianship Association, JAGA, has drafted the guidelines in the form of the revised, amended Japanese part in the Yokohama Declaration. We hope from the bottom of the heart, all of you could help us promote the reform of the Japanese guardianship law by confirming the Japanese part to be included in the Yokohama Declaration with the full support of Japanese and overseas participants. And I welcome the fact that the Yokohama Declaration is now being reviewed here at the Fourth World Congress on Adult Guardianship Law here in Ekna, Berlin. I hope that new life will burst into the Yokohama Declaration, and its reviewed content will contribute to the right and proper utilization of adult guardianship law across the globe. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I've had the good fortune to be able to attend each World Congress on adult guardianship. The first one was held in Yokohama in 2010. I think by far this one has been the warmest. At the conclusion of that first conference, Professor Arai stated that it was his wish that the ideals and issues concerning legal guardianship that arose in the first Congress be collated in the form of the Yokohama Declaration. He further stated that it was his hope that the Declaration would contribute to the future development of legal guardianship laws worldwide. The fact that we are all here at the Fourth World Congress in Berlin and revising that declaration is evidence that Professor Arai's wish came true. Has the Yokohama Declaration had any impact in Australia? I think the answer is largely yes, if not by virtue of the declaration itself, but the ideals it encapsulates. It's fair to say that the declaration has the greatest awareness amongst members of AGAC, and I will provide my answers through the prism of AGAC. AGAC stands for the Australian Guardianship and Administration Council, which is an interjurisdictional group comprised of all the public guardians, adult guardians, public advocates, boards and tribunals, as well as all state trustees or public trustees in Australia. I'm honoured to be the current chair of AGAC, which is comprised of these 25 bodies. AGAC is a leadership group of all the organisations that collectively provide legal authority for decisions on behalf of adults who experience disability to such a significant extent that they have found that law in Australia to be incapable of making reasonable decisions in certain domains of their life. Those decisions often involve protection of adults with disabilities from abuse, neglect and exploitation, whilst walking the fine balance of endeavouring to ensure empowerment and autonomy. The purpose of AGAC is to provide a forum at a national level for all relevant state and territory agencies associated with this jurisdiction. The then chair of AGAC, Anita Smith, was involved in drafting the terms of the Yokohama Declaration, which were consistent with contemporary views and practices in Australia. After the Yokohama Congress, at the next meeting of AGAC, held on February the 22nd October 2010, the delegates who attended the Yokohama Congress presented the declaration for endorsement by that Australian group. The meeting was an opportunity for lively discussion at that time about the declaration and the involvement of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in our work. Whilst it might seem somewhat startling now, at that time there were some members of AGAC who did not necessarily consider the convention to be directly relevant to the work of all AGAC constituent bodies. And there was concern about the authority of members to commit their respective agencies to the declaration. I'm pleased to say that at a following meeting in April of 2011, all AGAC members unanimously endorsed the international part of the declaration. This was a very positive step, as all members of the organisation came to understand the importance of the declaration and with it the convention, and the need for a consistent approach with other countries with progressive guardianship systems. AGAC also updated our foundation document, which now includes a commitment to information sharing, research with other bodies across the globe. AGAC subsequently organised the Second World Congress on Adult Guardianship. That Congress took place in October 2012 in Melbourne, brought together Australian and international experts in the disability and guardianship fields to consider the effect of the Convention on guardianship laws and practices. The conference, which was held 6 years after the Convention was adopted, was a great success and provided an opportunity to assess changes that have occurred in Australia and throughout the world, and to hear about current reform proposals. Since that time, the Australian Supported Decision-Making Network has been developed and has become an important forum for persons engaged in this area to share information about the development of legislative reforms that promote supported decision-making. There are also several research projects currently underway determining the best practice models for supported decision-making in practical terms. In terms of the legal frameworks that exist, there are several inquiries or reform initiatives which have occurred or are currently ongoing in Australia. Perhaps one of the most notable is the Australian Law Reform Commission's inquiry entitled Equality, Capacity and Disability into Commonwealth Laws. In addition, 2 Australian states, Victoria and Queensland, have also conducted their own inquiries. A reform inquiry is also currently underway in my home state of New South Wales. The reviews that have been completed have all concluded that there is a much greater need for empowerment of the person with a disability in the decision-making process, and a shift away from a best interest model of substitute decision-making towards one that promotes and safeguards the adult's rights, interests and opportunities. Finally, AGAC is in the last stages of preparing for our next National Guardianship Conference. This conference will be held in my city of Sydney later this year over 3 days, commencing on the 17th of October. The impact of the sentiments of the Yokohama Declaration is illustrated through the theme of this forthcoming conference, which is reflecting will and preference in decision-making. We're fortunate to have organised over 70 presenters, with the majority focused upon the trial and development of new models of supported decision-making. You're all very welcome to attend if you'd like a trip down under. In conclusion, I think it's clear that all AGAC members now understand the central importance and the challenges that present regarding the convention. The Yokohama Declaration was initially responsible for the commencement of these important discussions, and we should be grateful for that. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm going to be giving you a broader overview of what's going on in the States right now, apart from all the other issues that are going on in the States right now, in terms of guardianship, and to move towards Sally's more specific of what's been going on. So, as we all know, and we've acknowledged before, the older adult population is growing. It's growing everywhere. The Americans, like the rest of the world, we're living longer, we're living healthier, but we're also living longer with chronic conditions. That leads to the cost of Medicare, which is our health system for those over 65, and it's straining our national budget at $618 billion, or 20% of the total health care costs nationally spent per year. Family caregivers provide 30 billion hours of uncompensated care to their loved ones, valued at $522 billion. But not only is the aging population increasing, the demand for the assistance of substitute decision makers for persons with dementia, but also for we have 5.2 million people with dementia, 4.6 million younger adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities, 1.7 million individuals with traumatic brain injury and veterans returning from combat, and 1 in 5 Americans has some degree of a mental health disorder. In America, advocates have long promoted advanced planning so individuals can stay in control of decisions, opportunities, and choices. There are robust efforts to get people to plan ahead with legal tools such as living wills, healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney. We've got legislation, tools, education, promotion, events, media focus on planning ahead. And all throughout the states, we've got laws in place ready and available, and advocates ready and available to assist people in planning for future decision making. But many are not taking advantage of this opportunity to stay in control. 41% of baby boomers do not have a will. About 60% of people don't have a financial power of attorney, and about the same number, 60%, have not given instructions on healthcare preferences through advance directives by selecting a healthcare surrogate to convey their wishes when they are unable to. In the US, laws are fully developed regarding anticipatory decision-making, even including some states with mental health powers of attorney that recognize that a person with a mental health disorder can select an alternate decision maker for those times that the individual may stop taking their medication and not realize they need to rely on somebody to help them with their decisions. All US states have a specific legal standard for assessing mental capacity. There are variations from state to state in definitions, but generally there's a clear and specific criteria that must be met before a person is considered by the court to lack sufficient capacity to make their own decisions. But there are remaining concerns about consistency within the medical profession in applying standard and specific criteria in making evaluations or assessments. There's widely available guidance prepared jointly by the American Bar Association and the American Psychiatric Association on assessing capacity, with versions for mental health professionals, lawyers, and judges. The U.S. has failed to adopt the Convention on the International Protection of Adults, and that's not probably going to happen in the near future given the current U.S. presidential campaign turmoil. Interestingly, at the time of the drafting of the convention, the U.S. was in total disarray concerning the guiding principles of recognition and communication between jurisdictions. In the intervening period, the U.S. has drafted a model law on interstate jurisdiction. It is known as the Uniform Adult Guardianship and Protective Proceedings Jurisdiction Act, or as we love our acronyms, we call it UGAPSHA. This law calls for the recognition of guardianship orders from state to state, a simplified process to transfer these orders from one state to another one, and guidance on communication between judges in different states. This law is passed with amazing speed in U.S. time, and we have 45 states that have some law on the book regarding these procedures. The U.S. has also attempted but failed to pass the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Arguments against it were frivolous, but were successful in blocking passage. We have to wait and see whether the newly elected Congress will take it up again, and there continues to be national discussion regarding the convention. Thank you.
There are various provisions of the Yokohama Declaration that are in existence in the United States in our various state guardianship provisions. However, we recognize that there's more that we can do within the United States to comply with the principles and goals and aspirations of the Yokohama Declaration. We currently have a body of legal experts called the Uniform Law Commission, which is currently working on revising and updating our Uniform Guardianship Act. Once the work of the commission is complete, it will be up to the individual states to consider including the new provisions in their own state laws. While most state laws include each of the provisions of Article 4 of the Yokohama Declaration, the new model legislation strengthens the emphasis put upon persons subject to guardianship at the center of the guardian's decisions that are made on their behalf. I would like to give you a brief summary of some of the highlights of what we are doing within our model jurisdiction. Key, I believe, is that neither guardianship nor conservatorship is appropriate when the person's needs can be met with technological assistance or with decision-making support. We are also trying to find a balance between the need to provide meaningful procedural rights, but not make the process too cumbersome or expensive. In the pre-adjudication, the emphasis is not only on the person's limitations, but also there will be a requirement that in the assessment process, the abilities of the person shall be identified to the court. Also, the individual's preference for who would serve as guardian or conservator is to be the key factor to the court in determining who to appoint. The guardian is required to act in accordance with the person's expressed interests and prior directions. The guardian must involve the individual in decisions to the extent reasonably possible. Any moves to a more restrictive residential facility, such as a nursing home or a secure facility for those with dementia, those moves cannot be automatic. They must be included in the guardian's plan prepared at the initiation of the guardianship, or there must be express court approval. The court must explicitly state if the person is to lose the right to vote. There is clarity that the prior appointment by the individual of their choice of a surrogate decision maker through a power of appointment or a power of attorney or a healthcare directive is to take priority over the appointment of the guardian, and that individual's choice will remain in place unless the court specifically determines that that appointment is not in the individual's best interest. The individual has the right and the ability to seek termination or modification of the appointment or the removal of the guardian. The court is required to give the individual notice of key rights on a periodic basis. There is going to be a limit on the guardian's ability to curtail communications, visits, or interactions between the individual and any third parties of their choice. If there is to be a limit on the communication or visitation, it will require court approval, and there must be a demonstration that there would be a significant risk of physical, psychological, or financial harm to interfere with that relationship. We are developing a sample petition to make it easier for the petitioner to appreciate what they must include in a petition. We are also preparing a sample order to make it easier for the court to recognize their responsibilities in limiting or tailoring the guardianship order to the specific needs of the individual. There is a requirement for the guardian of the person to prepare a plan shortly after the appointment as a guardian, which will identify the goals of the individual, the proposed living arrangements, their efforts to obtain supports and services for the individual, and the activities or education or rehabilitation that is set forth in what they are proposing to do during the next year. For conservators or guardians who are appointed over financial matters, they must also prepare a plan for the court shortly after appointment as to how they intend to protect, manage, and disperse the individual's funds. These are just some of the highlights of provisions that are reflected in the Yokohama Declaration that illustrates how within the United States we are hoping to further the goals and aspirations of the Yokohama Declaration. I also want to proudly announce and distribute as I can the National Guardianship Association, which is a membership organization of all those stakeholders involved with guardianship, have endeavored to come up with 10 simple but very important ethical principles. These are the essence of what are contained within the National Guardianship Association standards of practice. Each of these principles are embedded within those standards. We hope through widespread distribution and awareness of these ethical principles, we hope that it will be clearer to newly appointed guardians just what it is that they are supposed to do and how they are to act. I have some copies here for you to take with you if you wish to come forward and pick them up after the presentation. But I would like just to briefly enumerate what we consider to be the guiding principles for a guardian in their action. 1, a guardian treats the person with dignity. 2, A guardian involves the person to the greatest extent possible in all decision-making. The guardian selects the option that places the least restrictions on the person's freedom and rights. The guardian identifies and advocates for the person's goals, needs, and preferences. The guardian maximizes the self-reliance and independence of the person. The guardian keeps confidential the affairs of the person. The guardian avoids conflict of interest and self-dealing. The guardian complies with all laws and orders of the court. The guardian manages all financial matters carefully. The guardian respects that the money and property being managed belongs to the individual. We hope that these 10 guiding principles will go a long way in both recognizing the goals of the Yokohama Declaration, but also the aspiration of what we in the United States believe are the principles to guide each guardian in their respective decision-making role. Thank you.
So I am honored to have remarks on the influence of the Yokohama Declaration in Korea. Yokohama Declaration has inspired Korean lawyers, practitioners in the field of social welfare, medical doctors, and policymakers who are interested in the protection of vulnerable adults to find proper solution in the protection of to harmonize the protection of vulnerable adults, and thus the harmonize the respect to the right of the self-determinations and the safeguarding vulnerable adults. I will shortly introduce to you the influence of Yokohama Declaration in Korea. Having Confucianism culture and a long history of strong family bondage, Korean society has not had full regard to self-determination, especially of the mentally or intellectually disabled persons or persons with dementia. The protection of such vulnerable adults has been regarded as the responsibility of family members. However, since the rapid industrialization and the urbanizations in Korea, Korean family bondage became to be loosened and broken down. We Koreans have been embarrassed to have to address new social phenomenon of abuse and neglect of vulnerable adults, even by family members. We have sought solutions in expanding social responsibility with filling the gaps, the vacant room of family responsibility. In this regard, adult guardianship has been regarded as a protective measure, which led to the reformation of old guardianship systems. However, the revised Korean law of adult guardian systems overlooked the importance of respecting self-determination of vulnerable adults, in that the revised Korean law still has legal incapacitation instrument, namely full guardianship and limited guardianship with the power to reserve consent to the decision by persons under guardianship on guardians. Moreover, in practice, those legal incapacitation instruments are still widely used and encouraged by encouraged for use by lawyers and judges. The newly born Korean baby, the new adult guardianship law has both inherited both good and bad DNAs, but it has been growing in a good environment where the principle of UNCRPD and the ideals of Yokohama Declaration have strong echoes in Korean experts and policy makers. I will shortly introduce the new development in Korea. The idea in Yokohama Declarations has led Korean civil society pushing Korean government and the parliament to legislate the new act, the guarantee of the rights of persons with developmental disabilities and the assistance of persons with a developmental disability act. The leading principle of this act is to respect the right to self-determination of disabled persons and to introduce many kinds of supported decision-making schemes. In this act, there are public guardianship services are provided to the persons with developmental disabilities without any legal incapacitations and with the financial assistance from public money, so as for those people to be integrated into the communities. The next development is the reformation of Civil Procedure Act. The purpose of the reformation of Civil Procedure Act is to expand the participation of disabled persons and the persons with dementia to participate in civil proceedings. It provided for litigation guardians to the persons without guardians, but who are really incapacitated. And furthermore, it provided for decision-making supporters to the disabled persons and the persons with dementia. The more recent development is the reformation of Old Mental Health Act. It reformed the purpose of the reform of Old Mental Health Act, which is enacted this year, is supposed to reduce the involuntary admission of persons with mental illness as much as possible, and provide them with social services to be integrated into communities. The idea reflected in Yokohama Declaration has been still leading Korean experts and the parliament and the government to improve the right to self-determination of disabled persons and safeguarding vulnerable adults. The driving forces are the disability movement, elderly protection movement in Korea. Those movements aim at introducing various kinds of supported decision-making schemes so that guardianship can find its proper role and place. We Korean delegates joined this conference in the same mind that the new adult guardianship system is expected to have good brothers and sisters and good friends in the very near future, namely supported decision-making schemes and so many kinds of safeguarding schemes for vulnerable adults. We hope the revised Yokohama Declaration will play a guiding role indicating us the destination and the goal for the vulnerable adult. We promise that we do our best to materialize Yokohama Declaration in Korean society and the vulnerable adults fully integrated into our community without damaging their human dignity at all. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would just briefly outline that we tried, when we prepared this World Conference, that we tried to address these many experiences and impulses, and together we arrived at the conclusion. Together means the organizing committees of the former World Conferences and the International Advisory Board, who supported us together with the International Guardianship Network, that the time has come now to take up this experience and new findings from the discussion, especially from the international human rights discussion, to take up this experience and to revise the Yokohama Declaration. And because it is not possible for us to draft a longer text line by line and to go through this together with you line by line, we have published this draft text on the conference website as quickly as it was possible, thanks to the support by the translators even before the conference in a German translation. And I would now like to briefly outline the key points which we believe that they deserve further development. The key point here is at the panel, it was emphasized time and again, and this is also the key point that popped up in our discussions time and again from the very beginning on Wednesday, throughout all the plenary presentations and panels, that it is a person-focused, person-centered support orientated towards supporting people in need, and everything that does not serve to protect the rights and self-determination of the person concerned and which does not support this person in exerting their ability to act is not compatible with a system of protecting adults, what we call as adult protection. This idea was already contained in the first Yokohama Declaration as the guiding principle, but we had the impression that it might be important to highlight it even more clearly, and also to try, even though it is an international declaration, and even though the legal systems and the social systems are very different, it was nevertheless important to try to be more concrete compared to the first version of the declaration. Sally Hermy mentioned some of the principles which are important from the US perspective, and you will find most or all of them in the Yokohama Declaration again, where we similarly tried to set forth more concrete orientation guidelines. And as I said, this was already included in the first version of the Yokohama Declaration, and now we tried to upgrade this a little bit more under this general principle. And therefore, I do hope that this revised Yokohama Declaration, as we called it, that you will support this, that you will take this home to the countries where you live and work, and that you agree to us that this is a good and future-orientated further development. And it goes without saying, and this will also be emphasized at the end, this is the next step. This is not the last step. This is not the final stage. We cannot lean back and be complacent about what we have already achieved. This is sometimes permissible, but you should nevertheless always be aware that this is a continuous further development and improvement process in the interest for the rights and to the benefit of the people concerned. You heard about many examples of this. And at this point, I would like to invite you to support this revised version of the Yokohama Declaration and maybe to give a warm applause to this effort and to the panelists here who represented this for their countries. And now I would need a separate microphone, but I'm now going to try to manage the two tasks, to talk and to carry something to present this to you. This is not yet the closing statement. This is instead the transfer of the handing over of the globe to Professor Ye, who sits next to me as the representative for Korea, as the organizer of the next World Conference, and I as the organizer of this conference. And we shall then pass on the globe from Japan via all the countries which so far organized World Conferences on to Korea. And each one will say a few words from their perspective.
Assistance.
So would you please allow me to speak German now, very shortly. Als Präsident des ersten Weltkongresses möchte ich mich.
Well, I was the chairperson of the very first World Congress, and I would like to thank all my colleagues and everybody who assisted in making this fourth World Congress a success. I mean, it's been perfect, and when I say that as a Japanese, it must be so. So we're handing over the baton from Yokohama, calling Yokohama, Melbourne and Washington, D.C., and pass it on to South Korea.
So I will give a short speech. I prepared for. Honor to take a role of succeeding the responsibility to hold the next World Congress in 2018. Even though Korean adult guardianship systems is a 3-year-old baby, it has good friend and supporter in Korea. Besides, Korean Institute of Adult Guardianship Law and Policy, which was established in 2013. Many guardianship organizations came to birth, and the Association of Guardianship Organizations may be expected to turn out in the very near future. Korean Institute of Adult Guardianship Law and Policy has 2-year term of president's policy. I am one of the founder of that institute and the first president. Now, new president, Professor Park, will play an important role of preparing for the next World Congress. But in 2018, another new president will welcome you. That policy is due to Korean political and social history and experience. You know, we have long dictatorship history, and so we want to democratize all of the things. But the real aim is to inspire as many experts as possible to take a leading role in any sense and in any directions, whereby we want to inspire the spirit of diversity to our organizations. It means that the responsibility of holding the next World Congress will be put not only on the Korean Institute of Adult Guardianship's Law and Policy, but also on the all players and experts who are hardly working in the field of protection of vulnerable adults in Korea, namely civil society and the public sector, will close cooperated to successfully organize the next World Congress. Through the next World Congress, Korean will provide for diverse opportunities to further discussions about supported decision-making schemes and safeguarding vulnerable adults between experts and the practitioners, between Asian countries and Western countries, and between countries which still have legal incapacitation instruments.
I'm having trouble with the connection.
Sorry. And the countries which successfully provided for supported decision-making schemes. Thereby, we all have opportunities to look back our past and can have opportunities to experience in advance our future. Thereby, we all find individually customized solutions suitable to their own country's history and the social environment. I will be a messenger to deliver the ideas and good practices discussed in the preceding World Congresses to Korean civil society and the public bodies, and to let them prepare for the next World Congress successfully. I hope in the next World Congress, we meet each other once again to confirm our endeavor to improve our systems and practices, and inspire and encourage each other to the direction of various kinds of supported decision-making systems and instruments. I look forward to meeting you all in Seoul in 2018. Thank you very much.
Dieser Kongress
You know that this convention is far from being over yet. There is a lot of more hard work to come. The only thing that's drawing to a close right now is the bilingual part, the part where you get simultaneous interpretation. So I would like to seize the opportunity to reach out to all those that will leave us at this point, all the participants that needed the interpretation. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your great participation and your contribution. If it hadn't been for you, none of this would have worked out so beautifully. And to those that will leave us during lunch, I would give 2 or maybe 3 pieces of further information. First off, and this is so important that I'm going to switch into English because most of the people listening to me are English speaking, and those are the ones that I would like to address. So forgive me.
For all those of you who are now leaving us and maybe enjoying Berlin or traveling home all immediately, I would like to inform you that you might it might be a good idea to have a look at our website next week. For next week, you will find on the website all materials, including those who have been delivered to us quite newly right this week during the World Congress, which you will not find on your sticks. So they will be developed on the via the website to you. You will also find there those small video clips we had made throughout the World Congress. They will be put online next week as well. And for those of you who rather prefer photographs instead of video clips, you will find all those photos of the World Congress online as well, including a possibility to download them via Dropbox with one click, so to speak. And I'm almost at the end of this final part. For all those of you who are not willing to wait until 2018 till we see each other, hopefully in South Korea again, I have been informed that there is the International Society for Family Law has taken up the protection of vulnerable adults themselves and is hosting a conference in July 2017 in Amsterdam. That is from the 25th to the 29th of July 2017. So you can have a World Congress on adult guardianship each year if you want to attend that. So you see, what started in 2010, which is not that much time, has spread out, and there are several academic societies and bodies who are engaging in that subject also, and we might say, at least in this respect, we already have done a good job. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Yes, yeah. Last announcement, 2 last announcements. One is the always returning one. Please leave your headsets and everything on the seats. Second, I would like to thank you, and I would like to invite you to do that by applauding the translators once again, for they have done a tremendous job.